Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. And now the Friday Crime Report. Portland, Oregon, Saturday, September 2nd, 2023, 6 o'clock p.m. Portland police went to a metro train platform in response to a report of a stabbing. When they arrived, they found two victims suffering from injuries, both of them just 17-year-old children. Both the victims as well as the eyewitness accounts say that the attack began on the train. The two victims had been on the train riding to their destination when a white man sitting in front of them jumped up and turned to face them. He was dressed all in black with a sweatshirt that said "Villain" in white letters, not very subtle. He then shouted F, followed by a racial slur as he began his rampage, stabbing one teenager in the chest with a 3-inch pocket knife. The second team's arm was slashed by the attacker as well. The assailant fled, but was spotted a few minutes later. After a brief foot chase, he was arrested. Not surprisingly, the cops took him in alive. No word on whether they took him to Burger King afterwards. The white media has identified the assailant as Adrian Cummings, who they're calling a 25-year-old homeless man who struggles with addiction. That's how they described this would-be killer. When the psycho killer Daniel Penny strangled Jordan Neely to death, the white media didn't call Jordan Neely a homeless man who struggled with addiction. They tried to demonize him every way they could. And he didn't harm anyone. Meanwhile, this animal tries to kill 2 children, but these racists in the white media call him just a homeless man who wrestles with addiction. They say that as if that was all there was to this guy, but of course, they weren't telling the whole story. The teenager who was stabbed in the chest had to be taken to the hospital in critical condition for damage to his heart and internal bleeding. Neither of the victims knew why this race killer attacked them, since they had done nothing to him, but as we already know under white supremacy, these killers don't need a reason, they just need an opportunity. We know exactly why this happened, and the white media does too, because they've gone to great lengths to avoid saying who these 2 victims were. They were both 2 black teenagers. The Fox affiliate article that I'm citing from only mentions the word black once. That's it, once in the entire article, and they don't even put it into the headline. 2 black teenagers are the victims of a knife attack by a white supremacist. One of them stabbed in the chest and nearly dies, and the white media thinks that their race is insignificant. When you go to other white media outlets, though, they don't even mention the victims being black at all. This is deliberate. It's meant to cause confusion. The white media hopes to get people to move on since they provide so few details about the crime. These white supremacists are making it a point to target black children. We need to understand that. When it comes to the Dylan Roofs and the Peyton Gendrons and the Adrian Cummings, we're dealing with animals here, not human beings. The white supremacist has no conscience or decency. Keep that in mind when dealing with them. And that includes the white media who runs interference for them. They went out of their way to not mention that the victims of this hate crime are black. And that was deliberate, because the Portland area is in the Northeast. People would just assume that the targets were most likely Asian, but of course the white media doesn't say that either. This is how propaganda works. People are conditioned by the narratives that the white media uses. They make it a point to use certain words and phrases in specific instances to talk about certain people, and that's how they condition the public mind. So when you talk about Portland or Seattle and make sure to show only white and Asian faces, people will intentionally be misled into thinking, well, this was probably some anti-Asian hate. And then people will call for a hate crime law specifically for Asians, and when you point out that black people are the overwhelming majority of hate crimes victims, we're told, well, it can't be that bad. People believe what they see from the white media, or in this case, they believe what they didn't see. Cummings has since been indicted on a slew of charges, including 1 count of second-degree attempted murder, 1 count of first-degree assault, 1 count of second-degree assault, 2 counts of first-degree bias crime, 1 count of first-degree robbery, 3 counts of unlawful use of a weapon, 1 count of interfering with public transportation, 1 count of first-degree attempted assault, and 1 count of second-degree attempted assault. Now, you probably see 1 or 2 charges in this list that don't actually have anything to do with the attempted murders on that day in specific, and that's because you won't be surprised to learn this isn't Adrian Cummings' first run-in with the law. In fact, it wasn't even his first run-in of the summer. Before I go any further, I found that the white media basically didn't want to have to report on this guy's priors. I had to really dig to find any mention of them, and I had to go to a number of different sources because none of these white media outlets had them all in one article or even one website. But this guy has been a one-man crime wave in the city for several months now. On July 7th of this year, Cummings was arrested after he caused a disturbance at a restaurant, and when the employees told him to leave, he pulled a knife and began cursing at them. He then took several steps toward their security guard. He was scheduled for a court appearance in early August, but of course he didn't show, so the judge issued a bench warrant, and police didn't have to wait long to find him because they would arrest him twice in the month of August. The first August arrest occurred when he was caught urinating in public on a university campus. Police found 2 knives and an expandable baton on him. The second arrest came on August 30th, a few days before he carried out his race attack on that train. That time, he was arrested for jaywalking. Police saw that he had a warrant out, so that being the case, why wasn't this guy in jail already if he had a bench warrant and the police had already arrested him a number of times?
Well, we have some new information this evening now about a horrific attack police say was racially motivated. We were talking about the man accused of stabbing 2 teenagers on a MAX train over the weekend. Adrian Cummins is now charged with attempted murder, assault, and bias crime. Now, it turns out prosecutors say Cummins should have been in jail at the very time of that attack, though we've learned he was turned away and released despite a judge's order to keep him in custody. Investigative reporter Evan Watson went to try to squeeze some answers at what appears to be a gap in our system.
Earlier in August, Portland police arrested Cummins. He had an outstanding warrant for failing to show up to court on charges of menacing with a knife. That happened earlier this summer. A judge ordered that Cummins needed to be held in jail until a hearing in late September. A police officer brought him to the jail, but jail officials and Corrections Health denied booking him. After KGW pressed for answers as to why Cummins wasn't held, a Multnomah County Sheriff's Office spokesman said on Wednesday that Cummins wasn't held in jail because of health or medical reasons. The spokesman did say health reasons are the most common example someone would be denied booking. In this case, Cummins was released from custody and is now accused of robbing a store, stabbing 2 boys in a racially motivated attack, and running from police.
So you see, he had already been arrested after the judge issued the order saying to lock him up, and yet the authorities just couldn't seem to hold him because, well, reasons. Though I think it's important to note that after he attempted to kill those 2 black teenagers, suddenly the county jail actually held him. Though the authorities refuse to say why it is that suddenly they've been able to keep him in custody, I guess his health must have improved miraculously, right? Or perhaps it's because of all of the media coverage that's been heaped on this case. But that's far from his only run-ins with the law. After his attempted double murder hate crime, the owner of a local convenience store said that he recognized Cummings as the perpetrator of an armed robbery at his store. He had stolen a number of items and then tried to stab the store owner's son several times when the young man attempted to stop him. Police have reviewed video footage of the incident and confirmed that Cummings was indeed the person who committed that crime, too. Back in April, Cummings was involved in a fight on the metro train. Gee, I think I notice a pattern forming. That time, he was armed with a gun, which led to him being charged with being a felon in possession of a firearm. And why was he a felon, you ask? You see, this reprobate isn't from Portland at all, or from Oregon, or even from the West Coast. He's actually a wanted fugitive from Ron DeSantis' state of Florida. This guy had been convicted of drug possession, and while he had been on parole, he skipped the state. Florida authorities issued an arrest warrant for him, but no matter how many times he was arrested in Oregon, he was never held nor extradited back to Florida. Instead, they just kept letting him go. Which pretty much is exactly what the folks in Florida did. His presence in Portland, the violent crime spree he had been on, the attempted double murder hate crime he had committed wasn't some coincidence. This is the Ron DeSantis effect, him and Christopher Rufo. When you hear DeSantis or Rufo saying that they want what they've done in Florida to become a blueprint for the nation, this is what DeSantis and Rufo are talking about. We'll continue with the moment of truth in just a moment, but first, a word from the official sponsor of Black Empowerment, Power Tools. There's no telling when something's going to come up, so make sure you carry your power tools at all times. You never know when you're going to need to bring the hammer down, or when you'll have some trash that needs to be blown away, or some obstacle that requires cutting down. Don't get caught empty-handed. Keep your hammer close by. Keep that leaf blower at the ready, and always carry your steel. Power Tools, because no matter what your day job or side hustle may be, there's no excuse for not being ready to put in some work. Their entire goal has been to embolden white supremacists to commit violence through a campaign of nonstop anti-black propaganda and the pushing of phony white grievance that's meant to justify it. That has been Rufo and DeSantis' goal, to pass laws and make public statements meant to make it clear that they are at war with black people and to encourage those with genetic immunity from the law to do the same. And as we saw in Jacksonville last month and have now seen this month, the racists from Florida are carrying out an organized race war against black people nationwide, and it is not random. This has been their goal from the very beginning. The law doesn't touch those with genetic immunity because you have racists like Rufo and people who think like him who are the ones who actually administer the law. And as we've seen with this Cummings creep, they just keep letting certain people go no matter what. This is done in order to make sure that certain people are given as much freedom in the society as possible, and this way, whenever some of them feel the urge to commit some hateful crime of violence, they won't be hesitant. Now, this creep is one of these super predators the white media and the politicians don't talk about, so he targets people very carefully for his acts of violence. He didn't just pick those kids at random. He targeted them because he figured that being kids and not being part of the criminal class, they would be unarmed. Soft targets. That's what these white supremacists look for. White supremacists hate the idea of hate crimes altogether because to them, that's punishing whiteness. That's what they say, by the way. Hate crime laws are meant to punish being white. Now, who's been arrested just for being white? The laws are meant as an enhancement to crimes committed based on motive, but what they're really saying is what their actual mentality is. That apparently, to some of them, they feel that anti-black violence is part of being white. At least to the white supremacists, that's how they see it. They're telling on themselves. This case is yet another in an endless string of examples of why there needs to be an anti-black hate crime law. Black people are the primary and majority victims of hate crimes in the United States. Even when the white media was making a sensation out of Stop Asian Hate, black people were still the majority of hate crimes victims. And yet you can't even get the so-called politicians in Congress or at the state level to make an issue out of it, not even the black ones. When it comes to hate crimes, they have an open policy of not doing anything where black people are concerned. But for any and everyone else, they can suddenly move. For example, back in May, just a few months before this race attack happened in Portland, the state of Oregon changed their guidelines for pretrial detention as it pertains to hate crimes. Oregon's Chief Justice signed an order that made it where people who have been accused of first-degree hate crimes can't just get out of jail the very same day that they've been arrested. They have to wait at least until arraignment before the judge. And the reason why? Because you had a white man who attacked a family of Japanese descent. You see, if it's black people we're talking about, well, there's nothing we can do. No laws are going to get changed. We're not changing anything. Oh, George Floyd was heinously murdered? Well, we're not changing anything. But with any and everyone else, oh, well, we can change laws for them. We can do something for them. That's how you understand that there is a rigid policy, an ironclad policy of targeting black people, that this for them is a hill they're prepared to die on. This is not merely some happenstance. This is the core of their political philosophy. This is what their laws are geared around. Making sure that attacking black people goes unpunished is the core of America's public policy. As black people, we have to take personal protection seriously. But understand, these white supremacists are making it their strategy to target black children. That requires extra vigilance on our part to help look out for each other, but it also requires extra determination on our part to stop these race attacks too. The authorities have a program at work, meant to keep these violent criminals on the streets until they eventually kill a black person, and only then will they finally be arrested. Maybe. Well, if some white supremacist calls themselves trying to get you or some other black person on the metro train, then you make sure to put them on the bullet train. Out of here. And that's this week's Friday Crime Report. Keep your eyes open and stay on alert, because there's a lot worse criminals out there than the ones the white corporate media chooses to show you. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Black Voltron Reloaded, Brian Walton, Anthony Pollard, Sabrina, and Mark Anderson. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.